Welcome everyone. My name is Zubin Adrianwala, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Jessica McVeary, uh, Nkosi Yearwood, who is the project manager for this planning effort, our division chief, Carrie Sanders, Amy Lindsay, who's with us on the environmental side of planning, Bilal Ali, who's helping us with economic analysis, Natasha Fahim, who's our urban designer for this project, and Alex Rixey, who's helping us with all things transportation. So we have a big team here who have helped in making tonight's presentation possible. I hope I didn't miss anyone. But and of course, Gavin Bowen, who is our summer intern, has worked a lot on this presentation. So thank you, Gavin. And with that, we'll get this presentation rolling. All right, so we wanted to share with you today what we have heard so far in this planning effort. Next slide, please. So as you're aware, our process is a long process, and we are still in the visioning and analysis phase. We are kind of getting towards the end of that phase. What you'll see today is a lot of analysis based on what we have heard so far. And we are excited to share this with you. But I will make a point that this is not by any means complete, and this is not the final level of analysis. We still have some more visioning coming up. The questionnaire that's online is still open. So there are still opportunities for the community to give us some feedback and let us know what they think. Next slide, please. So the planning recommendations basically develop at the center of this Venn diagram, where we have planner expert analysis. So some of the people that you just saw earlier on this call, their expertise comes into play. We have outside expert consultations. So we have an economic consultant on right now. We have transportation consultants. Bilal also provides us, sort of an understanding of that through market studies. Alex will help us with transportation, so on and so forth. And then, of course, the sort of critical piece is the wants, needs, values, and options that the community wants to see. So all this comes together to develop planning recommendations that are robust and defensible. Next slide, please. So the outreach we have done so far, we have had about 10 in-person or virtual meetings and workshops. I think this is number 11 for us. 13 in-community events. So in some cases where you invited us to an event you were hosting, or we were at a community event, whether it was a park event or an event in a plaza or something. And then, of course, we also did a lot of door-to-door conversations. So with some of our harder to reach communities, we wanted to make sure that we engage people who are in apartments, who are living in places which are sometimes underserved when it comes to planning efforts. And for that, we went to their doors, and we ended up having around 239 odd one-on-one conversations. In service of that effort and in service of engagement, we of course also sent out over 2,000 mailers. And then the questionnaire that I referenced earlier, we have collected as of the date of this analysis, which was 6/15, so the 15th of this month, we had about 166 responses collected. And then that led to 20,000 plus words of text that we analyzed in service of trying to understand what the community was trying to tell us. So as you can imagine, this has been a pretty robust effort so far, but we are hoping to continue on with it. Next slide, please. So some of you might have seen us or you have been to our meetings before and have engaged with us in a park or in a plaza, or maybe even in your backyard in some cases, or have seen us out and about in the community. Next slide, please. So these are some of the events where we participated, or we might have come to one of your civic association meetings, or have come to your apartment and spoken about the planning effort, or have met you in a coffee shop or at the Wheaton Arts Parade, maybe. So we have been out and about with this engagement, and have had some very good interactions with community members. Next slide, please. And of course, the sort of more formal in-person engagements and workshops or community meetings that we have participated in. So I think all in all, we have definitely had approaching 1,000 conversations with people, and people have been very generous in providing their feedback and providing their time, honestly, which is the sort of most valuable resource that you can offer here. And again, thank you for people who have joined us. Next slide, please. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that the outreach isn't over. The questionnaire is still open, and Bilal, I see, just posted a link of that in the chat. So if you haven't responded to our questionnaire, please do. We have a interactive map website where we get a lot of comments. So if you haven't already engaged with that, please engage with that. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, there have been flyers with multiple translated in multiple languages, videos, and of course, we have a fairly well-stocked website at this point. That's why this meeting is recorded. So if you couldn't attend the meeting, or if you want to recap of it, feel free to go and check it out. It's all available on demand on our website, usually within a week or so of the actual meeting. So if you have missed some of our older meetings, feel free to check them out. Next slide, please. And of course, we have had professional engagement with our organization. So of course, with our own planning board, we presented the scope to them and the Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel. So you can see here the picture of the panel, and the community was invited to listen to the panel's findings, and a bus ride that we organized for the Urban Land Institute's Technical Assistance Panel. Next slide, please. So some of the strategies and tactics, of course, as we said, like we did ride the C2 and C4 buses to try and engage with community members and people who were, again, populations that are traditionally hard to reach. We have made a concerted effort to reach out to them. And it's been very helpful to hear perspectives that we would normally not get to hear. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, we did do a door-to-door community conversations effort. We we hired a consulting firm, and then we had a contract with them. They helped us with participants who could speak multiple languages. We visited most of the apartments in the plan area, where it was our opportunity to engage with people who are renters. Again, homeowners typically actively engage in these planning processes, but renters sometimes go underrepresented, and then we wanted to make sure that that was not the case. So we have had an opportunity, as I said, to have almost 230 odd conversations. Conversations took place in 6 languages, so we were very lucky to have a team that spoke 6 languages. And it's been an interesting effort. And as I mentioned, this led to that, this and the questionnaire combined led to almost 20,000 plus words of text that we ended up analyzing in-house. Next slide, please. And again, as I mentioned, we have had meetings with you in your backyard. If you recognize yourself in our photos, that's always great. And then we have tried to come and meet you wherever you are. So next slide, please. So we did wanted to ask participants here how many meetings you have been with us in. So I'm going to launch a quick poll, and if you can see the poll and respond to it, that'll be great. All right, I'll leave it up for a minute or so, a few more seconds. Right, so this is somebody's second meeting, and we have a few people in the 2 to 5 meetings category. So again, thank you very much. Glad to have you here. Next slide, please. So I wanted to do a quick kind of dive into how we analyze the data and what kind of data did we analyze for this effort. So the comments analysis is basically a qualitative analysis effort where we read each and every comment that we got. We read the notes that we had taken in events, and then we analyzed the text. And then, of course, there was a questionnaire data analysis where we had more multiple choice questions that we had more numeric data to analyze for. And then we had location specific feedback where people said this intersection is a problem, or people spoke about specific neighborhoods where they had cut through traffic, or lack of certain facilities, or something that they wanted to see. And that was more anecdotal data that we also captured and made sure that we had a way of documenting it. And we'll share some of that today with you. Next slide, please. So again, the first piece is, of course, the comments analysis, which is in some ways the richest data we have. People, as I said, have been very generous with their time. They spoke to us at length in meetings and conversations. On the questionnaire form, we have a open comment section, and people were again generous with their time and gave us a lot of feedback there. So we took all that in and then tried to analyze it in as strong a way as possible. So next slide, please. So what we ended up doing is basically qualitative data analysis. So for some of you who might have taken anthropology class or qualitative analysis class, this might be redundant, of course, but what it does is it examines non-numerical data to reveal patterns, themes, and insights. And the goal, of course, is to explore the human experience and not quantitative data. It involves coding and categorizing. So you're trying to find out themes of what people are trying to say. And it allows you to capture information with a greater degree of nuance. So you're not relying on a quote kind of directly, but you're trying to capture the nuance in that quote. And then because the process is rigorous, it limits reviewer bias. So it prevents for the researcher in research context, for instance, from cherry picking quotes to support whatever case they might have. So next slide, please. So we had all the qualitative data that we collected. We coded it in a software known as NVivo. It's a qualitative data analysis software. And then we coded them to certain policy themes that we identified based on previous planning efforts and based on what we had heard so far. So next slide, please. So these are the general policy themes that we coded the data to. So you'll see these numbers. This is numbers for like internal reference. It helps us like keep track of these. So we had, of course, parks and rec. Transportation was a big one here. Housing, economic health, arts and culture, arts, culture, equitable community history, environmental issues, crime and safety. There was a lot of praise for the certain things. So we also had a praise code. And if it didn't go to the praise code, we can sort of by process of elimination identify it as a problem. And then there were, of course, general comments that people made. And then, of course, people gave us excellent feedback about the planning process or a specific event that we hosted. So we captured that too. And the little plus signs that you see just before, that is, if not here, of course, but in the software, when you open it, it opens up a series of sub themes. So for instance, within transportation, you can have themes of biking, pedestrians, traffic, safety, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is an example quote that we kind of made up. This is not somebody's quote. We wouldn't like put somebody's, but this is very typical of things that we heard. So here this sort of sample person is saying, I'm concerned about bike lanes causing accidents since people will not stop speeding. So we read it, we'll try to like parse the nuance out of this, and then they add that I would like bike or bus lanes, but I'm not sure how they'll be implemented. Lowering rent and increasing the number of nearby grocery stores would enhance affordability and convenience. People complain about mice, so our apartments have a lot of mice and rats. Maintaining the diversity and supporting small business is essential, so they are identifying a value here. And can you make it easier to cross University Boulevard? Maybe an overhead pedestrian walkway for safety. So they are offering a suggestion. And then I've also observed a rise in crimes, especially on buses and trains. So again, a general comment. So on the next slide, you'll see how we code something like this. So each little sentence, we would code it to multiple codes based on what we read in that sentence. So for the first one, we have a code, University Boulevard Design and Safety. We have the SHA bike lanes. So people spoke against them. But this is, again, the factor of nuance, which is this person may have been against those specific bike lanes, but still would like biking infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we capture that nuance whenever we are analyzing data. Then they speak about the retail services and housing affordability. So this 100-odd word comment can give us insights into 10 different themes or sub-themes. And that's the value of qualitative data analysis. So as you can imagine, we did this for about 20,000 words. So it's been quite a rigorous effort. So it doesn't allow for any cherry picking of quotes or anything, because once you get in the zone of reading this level of data, you're just doing it almost mechanically in some ways. So next slide, please. So again, these were 405 odd unique comments. So we had 239 comments. And when we say comments, they're in some cases pretty long interviews. And then 166 or so questionnaire responses, 165 actually. So we heard a lot from people. And then once we coded it, coded the complete text, this is the kind of themes pinwheel that emerged. So as you can see, people spoke a lot about transportation issues, especially with this being a corridor plan that is expected. They also spoke a lot about parks and recreation. So parks were a popular theme. Housing and economic health were followed by it. We heard, of course, some about crime and safety. And again, we can start finding patterns in this. And obviously, we're not sharing the whole bulk of that presentation here. We would be here the whole night if we did that. But we have tried to capture kind of the big themes around it. And then, of course, this is not just the commentary that we heard from individuals, but if you participated with us in a previous meeting, we had comments in Zoom comments that we analyzed to this. And of course, that commentary is a little tricky because it does not have demographic data. So we never really know who's saying it, but it's still coded in here. And then if you participated with us in a workshop, you likely had a staff member there who you went and spoke with. And somebody on this call from the staff likely gave me those notes. And then those notes were also part of this wheel. So we have a robust amount of information that we have collected from the community, and it's being analyzed in a rigorous fashion. Next slide, please. So again, we can start seeing things of what people are saying based on code. So this is just a kind of very straightforward cluster analysis. So where the words or codes are clustered together. So one way to interpret this would be when people speak about housing, for instance, you can see they also end up speaking about a lot of other issues. So housing is well correlated with conversations about other issues. People who speak about transportation or the words that are used for transportation end up identifying with crime and safety, and then arts and culture. So people may speak about access to certain locations or the desire to have recreational spaces within either walking access or transportation or transit access. So And again, as I mentioned, each of these codes has a series of what would the software would describe them as child codes. So this is just one snippet of the codes that are in the Parks and Rec code. We have recreations for kids. My son decided he wanted some recreation and walked into the room. I apologize for that. So an overall recreational availability, recreation facilities for elderly, specific mention of sports. So again, there's a lot of nuance that we have tried to capture in this process. Next slide, please. We also have a transportation code, again, one of our more popular codes, and you can start to see the sub-themes that are emerging. So people consistently mention the need for biking infrastructure. Speeding and general danger was also mentioned. The themes of disability access came up. Traffic was a big concern. And of course, the overall design and safety of University Boulevard as a corridor came up. Next slide, please. So for each of these sub-themes, what we can start to do is analyze the sort of, let's say, the top 50 words. So this is a pretty straightforward word cloud where we have tried to focus on just the sort of major words that we have heard from people. And in this case, we have used a synonym feature. So if somebody said lane instead of lanes, it still kind of puts that in one category. So you can start to see when people talk about biking infrastructure, what kind of words they're using. And I always like to say that every time I look at a word cloud, it almost reads as a sentence. So you can start to see what people are talking about. So it's going to change, I think. And then people want bike lanes to be evaluated in some ways. When they speak about biking, they speak about Sligo Creek. And how they would like to travel. They think of it as a transportation thing. Speeding and general danger on the streets. People talk a lot about turning of cars. Speed comes up consistently. Speed cameras are very popular in the community as an enforcement device. We leave it to the professionals as to what it ends up being. When people speak about lights, it's not lighting because we have a special code for lighting, but they're speaking about danger at intersections, even with traffic lights. And also they're talking about like the right turn movements and so on and so forth. So, and then when we look at traffic, people talk about traffic around schools a lot, and the kind of traffic that goes on the roads and in some cases in neighborhoods. So we start to get a picture building when we analyze these codes even further. Next slide, please. So if you have joined us in a previous meeting, you might remember sort of the plan area demographics. So this is roughly the demographics of the plan area based on the 2020 ACS information, actually from 2022 update. And then we have, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the information that we shared earlier more or less follows this pattern. Of course, not everybody shared racial or ethnic data with us. So we have some other or no data at the very bottom of this little table. So it doesn't allow us to exactly match it, but it gives us a fairly good sense that we are reaching populations that resemble the plan area in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. So going back to the coding effort, the second most popular code in some ways was the Parks and Rec code, and Sligo Creek Park and Parkway and the park are extremely popular. And I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute. So people love parks, as you can see in the word cloud here. And they also need more parks. So there's consistent demand for more parks or recreational facilities that they highlight at various locations. And then there's some conversations about what could be better within existing parks. So again, we have had an opportunity to capture all of that nuance because of this kind of analytical approach to how we looked at this data. Next slide, please. So again, I know the text here is probably illegible for most of you on the right side of the screen, but this is again the sort of the advantage of using data analysis software. So we search for the term just love or I love, and it immediately kind of helps us see when people talk about loving something in that area, what are they talking about. So when we just look at this word tree, as you would call it, you can see what they really love about the area. So people talk about loving the diversity. People love Sligo Creek Park. Proximity to local parks comes up. Nature comes up. Local businesses are popular. Convenience of location is highlighted in some cases. And access to transit also comes up. So when we do the analysis, we have an opportunity to keep digging further. Of course, there is always a risk of going down rabbit holes, but that is part and parcel of qualitative analysis. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, people do love the parks. So when we have the praise code, and when we cross-tabulated that with what other code do people talk about most in terms of what they praise when they talk about this area. As you can see, the parks and recreation code kind of is at the top, and then followed by some praise for transportation. If you look at the sub theme of that, transit gets a lot of praise. So the availability of buses, people speak about that as praise. Access to Wheaton comes up, so proximity to places comes up. And then some praise for housing affordability comes up. And then, of course, some praise for the cultural scene also comes up. And there is praise for the environmental kind of benefits of living in this area too. As you can imagine, crime and safety doesn't get a lot of praise. People don't say, I love that there's no crime here. Typically not a statement that comes up when they speak about it. So next slide, please. So we wanted to kind of summarize this. And again, this is 20,000 words reduced to 5 bullet points here. But what we heard was people value the diversity of the neighborhood. Pedestrian safety and need for a biking infrastructure is a dominant concern for most respondents. Sligo Creek Park is a very beloved local resource. People do still want more local food and entertainment and public spaces. And housing quality, affordability, and availability are concerns that come up in our conversations with people. So next slide, please. So we wanted to do a quick poll here and get your thoughts on what was the most surprising finding for you, and what is the most interesting finding for you. So let's give it 2 minutes, because hopefully people can write responses in the poll, and then we can share those responses too. So all right, I'll give it 1 more minute if anybody hasn't finished responding. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded. Let's take a quick look at the responses. So the responses I'm seeing are surprising findings. The fact that apartments are not sanitary and have rats and mice. Yes, we were also surprised by that. Based on the meetings, somebody said that the desire for bike lanes is high. Yeah, we again, surprising. We share the surprise with you because it came up consistently. I will add more nuance to that, which is the people who did not ride the bikes supported the bike lanes because they said they felt safer walking sometimes with the presence of the bike lane. Concerns about crime. Again, this is, I don't know, of course, who responded with this. They say, somebody says concerns about crime were surprising. I find it very safe here. The multifamily homes, so apartments in some cases, express that, or people who took transit often have a perception. And again, I will sort of caveat that nuance with, we have a special code for when people spoke about a crime event. So if people spoke about breaking into their car or somebody vandalizing something or something like that, that was coded differently. But people don't necessarily speak about crime as events based, but just the general perception. And then somebody mentioned findings are not as surprising, so that's also good. The interesting findings, people wanting more park space. Somebody says like overwhelming need for biking infrastructure, which might make parking worse. And then importance of parks, which this person shares that feeling. And then the positive view of Parks and Rec and the desire to increase it. So again, thank you very much for sharing this. So moving on, next slide, please. So now we'll move on to the questionnaire. As I mentioned, we have about 166, 165 odd total responses. Next slide. This age distribution of the questionnaire responses, and if you haven't already responded to it, the link is in the chat. Feel free to do so now. We are still collecting data, and your response will show up in the data somewhere. The age distribution, again, is very close to what we have seen in the neighborhood. We had some young people participate, but this age group being the highest is pretty close, because I think the neighborhood's median age falls in this range. And then these are the neighborhoods that we heard from. So, and to the previous point about the support for bike lanes, I think the traditionally hard to reach population that we ended up reaching through canvassing efforts when we went to apartments, that's where car ownership is a burden to a great extent. So that support to bike lane might have been skewed there, because if you look at this table right here, the participation of apartments is not representative of the total population of the area or the total housing units of the area. So next slide, please. Then again, support for pedestrian infrastructure or crossing concerns also reflected in the questionnaire. In the quantitative data, everybody is at least most of the people are crossing University Boulevard every day or 3 times a week. So people recognize that crossing the 6 lanes is dangerous and inconvenient. So we see support for that. Next slide, please. And then we also kind of cross-compared it if street crossings were somehow correlated to bus usage. Surprisingly, they were not. I mean, of course, people who use bus are more likely to have to cross street because, of course, if you go somewhere and come back, you are going to end up crossing the street. But we were surprised that it wasn't very correlated, and that regardless of whether you used the bus or not, people were crossing the street. Next slide, please. So the questionnaire gave us some insight when we asked about how bus stops could be improved, shelter from protection from weather, came up. Real-time bus arrival information was a big one, and then better lighting, which some of us experienced when we had evening meetings along the corridor. Significant demand to improve and increase pedestrian crossings across University Boulevard. That was consistently popular everywhere. Next slide, please. So now we'll go to the more sort of anecdotal portion of this data, where we heard specific concerns from people. People offered insights of specific intersections. So if you go to the next slide. So this is our plan area, and the little red dots that you see here are places we recognize people were consistently speaking about. So we'll kind of start at Wheaton and then go down towards Four Corners or 495 as we go through this geography. So next slide. So at University and Reedy, there were concerns about the hawk beacon at the intersection. People spoke about how drivers do not obey traffic laws at this particular intersection. Crosswalks on this stretch of University are very far apart and encourage unsafe crossings. At East Crest, people requested better pedestrian crossing again. Poor lighting was highlighted. And an intersection should be signalized was a comment that we also received. So next slide. People spoke about traffic congestion between Arcola and Carrington, Northwood High School pickup and drop off occurring at the curb lane, the need for wider sidewalks to accommodate student pedestrians. This is something we saw when we were out and about, and we did some bus stop outreach to students. The need for traffic calming was mentioned. At University Boulevard and Carrington, people again spoke about the concern they have for the Northwood High School students and pedestrian safety. Speeding was another concern, and people spoke about improving the bus stop conditions. Again, the high school students being some of the primary users there. Next slide, please. When we came down to Dennis, again, traffic calming, very popular, pedestrian safety, recurring concern, the desire to have wider sidewalks, improved street crossing for access to North Four Corners Park was mentioned here at Brunette, dangerous intersection for vehicles and pedestrians. Again, the desire for a signalized intersection, and then high rate of vehicular collisions along this corridor was highlighted here. And some of this bears out in the data that we have from internally also. So next slide, please. And then, of course, going down to the Four Corners area, concerns about pedestrian safety, safety of vehicles also, desire for a traffic signal at Lorraine, safer infrastructure for other modes of transport so that residents can access services in Four Corners without having to drive. When we met at the workshop, people spoke about how living so close to certain things, and they would like to walk, but they still got in their cars to go to the Woodmore Shopping Plaza or to the Safeway, just because it felt safer. And then near Lexington, people spoke about the traffic flow through the area. Frequent traffic cutting through neighborhoods was a concern as people avoided the traffic on US 29 and University Boulevard. And then pedestrian safety concerns also came up here. So next slide. So given what we have heard, we'd like to hold a quick poll again, and we'd like to hear from you about what we have missed so far. So if you want to raise, and again, feel free to use the questionnaire that is linked here to respond to this. And then if you can offer any additional insight into a specific geography. So if there is an intersection or a neighborhood that we missed, or that you have particularly been concerned about. And again, we have the interactive map in the chat, so you can go there and you can highlight multiple geographic points. So by no means is this question the last opportunity to do it. So let's give ourselves 3-4 minutes maybe to respond to this. we can give it maybe 1 more minute and then. I'm seeing some responses here, so I can end this poll in just now. And let's take a look at the results quickly. So, again, to reiterate, the question was, given everything you've seen, what did we miss, or what additional insights would you like to offer? So when it snows, somebody says most of the sidewalks along University are not cleared, and pedestrians often walk along the edge of the road. Drivers can be very aggressive throughout this corridor, so traffic calming and better pedestrian buffers, safer crossing for peds and bikers are needed everywhere. Not just at the places mentioned. So that's a very good point. There's not enough room on the sidewalks for a parent and child to walk safely side by side. So the width of the sidewalks is highlighted. Somebody asks, was there any concern about building multiple new apartment complexes with too many units and increasing congestion along the corridor close to these neighborhoods? We can address that question for sure. I see a comment in the chat, and I'm sorry, Emily, if I close the poll too soon, but I'm gonna highlight this too. They mentioned it would be great to have more places to cross University, not just at traffic lights, and to have a light at those crossings, such as next to the retirement apartments near University and Lorraine. Unless there is no light to support it, many drivers just go through these crosswalks and do not wait for pedestrians to cross. Yeah, definitely. This concern has been raised several times, and the concerns about the hawk signals also. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing these insights. Again, by no means the last opportunity to share your concerns or ideas that you have. Next slide, please. So we have an upcoming event on July 12th. You'll see us with a table at the Tempest with Prince George's Shakespeare in the Park at North Four Corners Local Park on Wednesday. The event begins at 6 p.m. And then on July 18th, we'll have Amy, who's on the call, along with our colleague from Montgomery Park's Chuck, leading a discussion at Wheaton Forest Local Park, weather permitting, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. So as I mentioned, please join us for the next event too. And then next slide, please. So again, kind of tied back in together, we still want to continue hearing from you. We'll have the questionnaire open at least for the next month before we go out for summer break in August, and the events come towards an end, and then we'll continue sharing more insights. So this analysis by no means is complete. We'll continue analyzing the data, and as I mentioned, some of those rabbit holes, we are looking forward to going down those rabbit holes of analysis to see what we can find. So we'll continue doing this over the next few months as our planning recommendations for this plan develop. And I think that's all we have for tonight. So although we don't have a formal question slide, if you want to ask a question, please, if you feel like unmuting yourself, please let me know and I'll be happy to unmute you. You can raise your hand, or if you want to put it in the chat, we'll be happy to respond to the questions that we can. But I did want to address the the question that somebody raised in the last point about density, we have a specific code that speaks about where people asked for density or people were concerned about density. So yeah, we can definitely analyze that a little bit more to see what people talk about when they're concerned about more development coming in potentially. And I'm sure there's an overlap or a Venn diagram I can think of where if we look at the traffic at University Boulevard code and the housing code at the same time, if somebody mentions housing and traffic as correlated in the same sentence, it will show up, and it probably has shown up in our data. So that's an excellent analytical question that we can ask the data for sure. So we have a small crowd here. So if you want to if you can unmute yourself, you can, or I'll be happy to unmute you. I see one hand. Timothy, go ahead.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, well, two things. One, I got cut off before I could hit submit on my thing. So just real quick, what I was going to say on that is that the bus, well, or the question I was going to ask is how the bus lane pilot will factor into your studies. And in particular, the impact that it might have on the traffic going to 2 lanes on that stretch. And then tied to that with traffic is the, there was a lot of mentions of additional traffic light potential, not the hawk lights, but just actual lights in some of the comments. And there's already an issue, I'd say, with unsynchronized lights, not just along this stretch, but along University as a whole. So I would say just that if any new lights are put in to avoid creating large backups, making sure that the light synchronization is factored into any new lights that come in. So that was from the comment section. From what I was going to ask now, so I mean, I've participated in several of these. A few have had really large turnouts. I'd say roughly, I'd say half the crowd on this call is your staff, and half of us are people in the community. And I'm just wondering how, like, you've done a good job getting good turnout, but what more? I mean, are there other ways to still reach more people and get a larger input, considering the large population of the corridor? It still feels like you're getting those of us that are active in the community, or those of us that are vocal in the community, whether good or bad. And so you're not necessarily capturing as large a portion of percentage-wise of the community as might really be needed to get a really wide set of ideas coming in.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to go with the transportation question, and I can address this in a minute?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, thank you for your question and your comment. So the first question, if I understood, was how are we taking the MCDOT bus lane pilot into account in the study? And that's something we will be looking at. So we've actually already collected a little bit of data this spring while school was still in session and before MCDOT installs the pilot bus lanes. And then my understanding is that MCDOT will be installing those over the summer. And we are scheduled to collect some more data on the traffic volumes and speeds in the fall. So we'll be looking at the effect of those lanes on the traffic patterns, and then also taking those into account as we make our recommendations for the plan. And then to your point about the crossing locations, yeah, thank you for that feedback too. I think when it comes to signal timing and operations, that's an MCDOT question, and that's certainly something we'll coordinate with them on as we make our recommendations. I think we've heard a lot of feedback about providing additional protected crossing opportunities, whether that's a full color signal or something like a hawk that's designed to stop traffic. And I think whatever those recommendations end up being, we'll coordinate with our implementing partners at MCDOT. And I think your comment about timing or coordinating those signals is well taken. So thank you for that comment.
Thanks, Alex. So the second part of the question, in terms of like, there is definitely some self-selection bias, and you're right. Like, we have had meetings with one of our Zoom calls. We had to make it into a webinar because we had 130 people in the Zoom call, and a meeting would only support 100. So yeah, we have had some sort of fluctuations in terms of participation. And you're right, like we have some kind of more enthusiastic participants. But again, to that end, that's why we have done the outreach where we went door to door. So as you know, as I mentioned, we knocked about 1,000 doors, and that led to around 250 odd conversations. So for scale, the area has about the plan area has about 3,500 odd housing units. So we've roughly knocked on, like, more than like nearly a third of the doors in the plan area. And in some cases, of course, there'll be like, partners or kids or somebody who has spoken to us. So the survey has about 160 plus responses. So when you look at 400 odd responses, we have had a fairly significant feedback level that we have seen. And we have tried to keep kind of a running list of who's been coming to the meetings every time we have a sign up sheet. And of course, with Zoom, it's kind of difficult because you can sign up for the meeting, but you don't show up. But even there, we are kind of well into the hundreds in terms of unique participation. So I think we are sort of, more is always better, but we are kind of content with the amount of like feedback we have gotten from different sources. So yeah, I want to like clarify that this call is not representative of the kind of engagement we have had. And I mean, again, as I mentioned, we have had conversations with people at bus stops, in parks. So again, some of those things are a little tricky because you cannot collect demographic data. You don't know how old somebody is, what the race is, or what their housing situation is. But regardless of that, I mean, we've easily had 1,000 conversations. So with 3,500 odd units, we feel kind of happy about the level of engagement and time people have given us. But yeah, I mean, definitely, not stopping. So please spread the word for the next 2 meetings and come see us in parks.
And Zubin, I'll also add to that the engagement and outreach is ongoing. And if you all know of groups or locations or events that we should engage in, we would welcome your thoughts on those groups and locations. And I can actually share a slide that has our contact information in just a minute, so that if you want to, snap a photo and make sure that you share this information with your neighbors, with your friends, with folks that you think might be interested, we're happy to meet people where they are. So I think you saw some photos earlier tonight of Nkosi kind of out, in someone's backyard. And so, this is certainly ongoing, and we welcome your thoughts on where we can connect with your neighbors and friends.
Thanks, Jessica. Any other questions? As Timothy rightly pointed out, we have a small crowd, so feel free to jump in. And of course, you can send your questions via chat too if you want. So if you don't want to unmute yourself, feel free to just type it in, and we'll be happy to address those questions. All right. I think we'll give it a minute, and then, and of course, as Jessica mentioned, we'll share our contact details. So by no means the last opportunity to ask a question or have a conversation with us. We are available. Right. Thank you, everyone. Again, we appreciate you giving us your time this evening. And with that, we'll end this meeting. Again, thank you everyone very much. We'll hope to see you at the next event.